Since I was a child, I have always loved driving. My passion for trucks and long roads came from my father, who was also a trucker his entire life. I remember how he would take me on some of his trips, and I watched in awe as he maneuvered those enormous vehicles with such skill and calmness. My name is Aiden, and I work for a moving company in the United States. For years, I've been transporting furniture and belongings for our clients to their new homes. I love my job, especially because it allows me to travel and see different places while doing what I enjoy. One day, I received an assignment that would take me from Chicago to Denver. The truck, filled with furniture, boxes, and personal items, carried the entire family that hired our services. Before embarking on the journey, I ensured the secure fastening of everything. Night fell as I drove along the I-80. To stay awake, I usually listened to country music and chatted on the phone with my mom, who always worried about me during these long hauls. That night was no different. I was talking to her about some issues at home when something unexpected happened. Suddenly, I heard loud, thumping noises coming from the back of the truck. They were so intense that even my mom could hear them over the phone. She asked me worriedly what was happening, and I told her I wasn't sure, but it was probably something that had fallen or come loose. I decided to pull over at a rest area to check out what had happened. I told my mom I needed to hang up to inspect the load, and I made sure to turn on all the exterior lights on the truck to illuminate the area. I got out with my flashlight and opened the rear doors of the truck. To my surprise, everything seemed to be in place. However, as I made my way to the back of the truck, I observed a tilted cardboard box and several scattered toys on the floor. It struck me as odd, since all the boxes had been securely sealed and strapped down when I started the trip. I decided to gather the toys and take a closer look at the box. I carefully inspected the box and noticed it was well sealed with several layers of tape. There didn't seem to be any logical reason for it to have opened like that, but I decided not to dwell on it and made sure everything was securely in place before getting back into the cab and continuing my journey. Just a few minutes after resuming the drive, I heard the same thumping noises again. This time, they were louder, almost as if someone was hitting the box from the inside. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to stay calm and looked for another safe spot to pull over. I parked the truck in a small rest area along the side of the highway, turned on the exterior lights, and quickly got out to check the box once more. As I opened the rear doors, I saw that the same box of toys was open again, with the toys scattered across the floor. Something was definitely not right, and I began to feel really uneasy. While I was picking up the toys for the second time, I heard a sound that chilled me to the bone. A soft, distant child's laugh. I looked around, trying to find the source of the sound, but there was no one in sight. The darkness enveloped the rest area, completely deserted. I tried to convince myself that I was just imagining things due to the fatigue and stress of the trip. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me. I closed the toy box with more tape, ensuring it couldn't open again, and quickly returned to the cab of the truck. As I continued driving, I couldn't stop thinking about the laugh I had heard. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I expected to see something out of the ordinary, but everything seemed normal. However, the sense of surveillance persisted, and I came to the realization that this journey would be significantly longer and more unsettling than my initial expectations. I drove with my eyes fixed on the road, trying to stay focused, when suddenly the thumping started again, this time accompanied by a soft humming. The melody was childish and repetitive, like something a kid would sing while playing. Fear took hold of me, and I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I decided not to stop in the middle of nowhere again, and continued to the next truck stop. I needed to be in a well-lit place with people around. As I drove, the humming and thumping continued, increasing my anxiety. It felt like something was playing with me, and the helplessness was eating me up inside. Finally, I reached a truck stop and parked it near the main lights. I quickly got out of the cab and ran to the back of the truck. With trembling hands, I opened the rear doors, ready to face whatever was causing the noise. Once again, I was surprised to find the toys scattered on the floor and the box open. I decided to examine the toy box more closely. I picked it up and checked every corner, but found nothing out of the ordinary. The toys were old and worn, some with marks that indicated they had been well loved by their previous owner. However, there was no sign that anything or anyone had moved them. While putting the toys back in the box, I heard the humming again, but this time it was closer and clearer. I turned around quickly, expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. The truck stop was empty, save for the attendant who appeared unaware of anything. I decided to secure the box once more, using an excessive amount of tape, and placed it back in the truck. I climbed back into the cab and took a moment to calm down. I took a deep breath and told myself I needed to keep going. I knew something inexplicable was happening, but I also knew I had a delivery to make and couldn't afford any more delays. With my heart still racing, I started the engine and continued my journey to Denver, hoping the thumping and humming wouldn't torment me again. As I drove, I tried to distract myself with music and focus on the road, but the feeling of unease didn't go away. Suddenly, I heard a soft, delicate voice saying, "Do you want to play with me?" The voice of a little girl, clear and crystalline, came from the box in the truck. A chill ran down my spine. I decided not to stop immediately, hoping it was just my imagination playing tricks on me due to the fatigue. But the voice continued, repeating the same question over and over. My mind was filled with terror and confusion. How could I be hearing a little girl's voice in my truck? I couldn't ignore it any longer. Despite the fear, I decided to pull over once more at a well-lit rest area. I turned off the engine and, with trembling hands, opened the rear doors of the truck. I opened the toy box once more, scattering the toys all over the floor. But this time, I felt a more intense presence, as if someone were there watching me. I quickly gathered the toys and put them back in the box, trying not to pay attention to the voice that now seemed more persistent and demanding. I sealed the box with additional tape and secured the truck's rear doors. I was determined not to stop again until I reached my destination. I returned to the cab and started the engine, but before I could continue, the rear doors of the truck burst open with a deafening crash. The girl's voice grew louder, almost a scream, begging me to play with her. I quickly got out of the cab and saw the toy box open again, with the toys scattered everywhere. Fear paralyzed me for a moment, but I knew I had to do something. I shut the rear doors firmly, securing them as best as I could, and returned to the cab. However, before I could start driving, I felt a strong, heavy thud, as if something or someone had closed the rear doors from the inside. This time, I couldn't contain my panic and decided to drive without stopping until I reached a safe place. I drove as fast as I could, desperately wanting to reach Denver as soon as possible. However, the terror wouldn't leave me alone. I decided to call the police for help and explain what was happening. Although I feared they wouldn't believe me, I felt I had no other choice. Fortunately, the highway patrol responded quickly and asked me to stop at the next service station. When I arrived, I saw the patrol lights and felt a bit relieved. The officers approached, and I told them everything that had been happening, from the thumps to the girl's voice. The officers inspected the truck, opening the rear doors and checking the toy box. To my surprise, they found nothing out of the ordinary. The toys were in place, and there was no sign that anyone had been there. Despite not finding anything strange, the officers escorted me to Denver to ensure I arrived safely. Finally, I reached Denver and delivered the move to the family. While unloading the furniture and boxes, I decided to tell them what had happened during the trip. Upon hearing my story, the mother of the family turned pale, and tears welled up in her eyes. She asked me to show her the toy box. The sight of the toys filled her face with sadness. She explained that her young daughter had tragically passed away the previous year, and those were her favorite toys. The family had decided to keep them as a memory, but didn't expect something like this to happen during the move. The mother told me that her daughter used to hum the same melody and always asked everyone to play with her. She thanked me for handling the toys with care and respecting her memory. Although the experience had been terrifying, I felt that I had helped the family keep their daughter's memory alive in some way. The sadness in their eyes deeply moved me and made me reflect on the experience. As I left the house, still moved by the experience, I looked in the rearview mirror and for a brief moment saw the silhouette of a little girl smiling and waving from the window. I was in shock and decided to call my mom to tell her everything that had happened. My voice trembled as I recounted every detail, and she listened attentively, trying to console me. I thought that leaving the toys with the family would end everything, but as I drove back to Chicago, I began to hear the girls humming again. The sound was faint but constant, and every time I heard it, a chill ran down my spine. I was nervous and confused, and I had to stop several times along the way to calm down. I prayed at each stop, asking for protection and trying to soothe my mind. However, the humming persisted, as if the girl were still with me, playing in the truck's box. The experience was terrifying and distressing, and the constant sense of surveillance never dissipated. I drove with a mix of fear and hope, hoping that everything would resolve once I reached my destination. Finally, as I entered Chicago, the humming abruptly stopped. The sense of relief was immediate, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. I understood that the girl had decided to stay somewhere along the highway, finding a new place to play. Although the experience left a lasting mark on me, I felt grateful that her spirit had finally found peace. I really hope you liked this scary tale. I would be interested in hearing your opinions or experiences if you have any similar ones. Please remember to hit the bell symbol, like the video, and subscribe to the channel if you find it entertaining so you don't miss any more stories.
My name is Cole, and I've been a trucker for almost my entire life. Now I'm 42 years old, and I must say this profession is more than a job for me, it's a vocation. Since I was young, I've always been fascinated by the idea of traveling the highways of America, discovering new places, and being part of the vast network that keeps our country moving. Over the years, I've seen and experienced a lot on the roads. The dangers come not only from criminals, but also from adverse conditions, and sometimes the inexplicable. My colleagues and I have shared many stories around campfires and at truck stops. But there's one experience in particular that remains a mystery in my life. That night, like so many others, I was returning from delivering a load in Dallas and heading back to Atlanta. It was around 11 o'clock at night, and the highway was quiet, with very little traffic and a darkness that seemed to swallow everything. I decided to tune in to the radio to stay awake, and that's when I received an unexpected call that would change the course of my night. I was listening to an old rock song on the radio when suddenly static interrupted the transmission, and I heard the voice of a friend, Todd, calling me over the truck's CB radio. Todd is an old friend and colleague in the same profession. His call surprised me because he had mentioned he would be taking a week off with his family in Florida. "Cole, are you there? I need your help," Todd said in a voice that sounded strangely calm but urgent. I responded immediately, intrigued by his tone and the fact that he was working instead of enjoying his vacation. Todd explained that his truck had broken down in a remote area and he needed me to come help him because he couldn't reach anyone else. I asked him for his exact location in order to calculate how long it would take me to get to him. I was surprised that he gave it to me with such precision, which made the situation seem even stranger. Even so, I told him I would be there in about an hour and started my journey to the given location, hoping to help my friend and colleague. As I drove towards the location Todd had given me, I couldn't stop thinking about how strange the whole situation was. Why hadn't Todd gone on vacation? What was he doing in such an isolated area? These questions kept running through my mind, but I focused on getting there as quickly as possible. The road became increasingly dark and lonely. The lights from my truck were the only thing breaking through the blackness of the night. Finally, the GPS indicated that I should turn onto a side road, barely visible among the vegetation. I drove cautiously, not wanting to risk getting stuck in that desolate place. I decided to call Todd again to make sure he was okay and to get more details about what had happened with his truck. However, this time, there was no response. The line was silent, which increased my concern. I sped up, determined to find my friend and get him out of there as soon as possible. After several minutes of driving along the dirt road, I finally arrived at a completely desolate area. There were no lights or signs of life in sight. I could only hear the crunching of the gravel under the truck's wheels, as well as the distant murmur of the nocturnal wilderness. I started to feel increasingly uneasy. I tried calling Todd again over the CB radio, but there was no response. The situation grew more unsettling with each passing minute. As I advanced, the road became narrower and more difficult to navigate, increasing my nervousness. Finally, I reached the exact point Todd had indicated. I stopped and turned off the engine, staying in silence for a moment to listen for any sign of his presence. However, the only thing surrounding me was thick darkness and the distant sound of the wind through the trees. Something was not right, and I knew it deep down. When I got out of the truck, the darkness seemed to envelop everything. The only source of light was my flashlight, which barely illuminated a few feet ahead. I walked a bit further, calling Todd's name out loud, but only received silence in return. The feeling of unease intensified. The air was cold and heavy, and I felt as if something was watching me from the shadows. I decided to keep exploring the area, hoping to find some trace of Todd or his truck. However, there was no sign of him, only the dirt road stretching into nothingness. It was then that I noticed some tracks on the ground, as if a truck had passed through recently. I followed the tracks, hoping they would lead me to Todd. As I walked, I couldn't shake the thought of how strange it was that Todd had called me to help him in such a remote place without any clear explanation. The tracks on the ground led me to an even narrower path, surrounded by dense trees and vegetation. The flashlight barely allowed me to see a few steps ahead, and every noise I heard made me jump. Despite everything, I continued, determined to find my friend. Only the crunching of branches under my feet and the occasional hoot of an owl broke the silence in the overwhelming darkness of the woods. It felt like time was standing still, and I was walking in circles, but the tracks on the ground told me I was on the right path. Every now and then, I called out for Todd, but received no response. Finally, I reached a small clearing in the woods where the tire tracks abruptly ended. In the middle of nowhere, I saw an abandoned truck that I immediately recognized as Todd's. I ran towards it, hoping to find my friend inside, but when I arrived, the truck was empty. The feeling that something was terribly wrong intensified. Todd's truck was completely empty, with no sign of him anywhere. I looked inside the cab, searching for any clue as to where he might have gone, but everything was in order, as if he had simply vanished. The feeling of unease and worry grew with each passing moment. I tried calling him again, both on the CB radio and his cell phone, but received no response. The situation was getting more dire. Where could Todd be? I began searching the area around the truck, moving cautiously through the dense vegetation, calling his name over and over. As I explored, I remembered Todd had mentioned he couldn't reach anyone else. Why had he called me specifically? The night was growing colder, and the sense that something very strange was happening was impossible to ignore. I was determined to find my friend, no matter what it took. Desperate for some answers, I decided to call Todd's wife, Emily, to see if she knew anything that could help me. When I told her what was happening, I tried not to alarm her too much, but I couldn't hide my concern. Emily was silent for a moment before responding. "Cole, Todd is here with me and the kids. He told us he was taking a week off. Are you sure he called you?" Her voice was filled with confusion and worry. A chill ran down my spine when I heard those words. How was that possible? I had talked to Todd. I heard his voice. My mind is filled with questions and doubts. If Todd was with his family, who had called me? And why had they led me to this place? Emily tried to reassure me, but I knew something very strange and possibly dangerous was happening. I hung up the phone, feeling more lost and bewildered than ever. As I processed Emily's unsettling revelation, a chill ran down my spine. I decided to return to Todd's truck to investigate further, but something in the air had changed. The atmosphere felt heavier, and a sense of imminent danger loomed over me. Suddenly, I noticed movement around me. In the distance, among the trees, dark silhouettes began to appear. At first, I thought they were shadows cast by my flashlight, but soon I realized they moved in an unnatural way, as if they were watching me. The silhouettes slowly approached, emerging from the woods in increasing numbers. I tried to stay calm, but fear began to take hold of me. I knew I had to act quickly. I ran back to my truck, feeling the presence of those figures closing in on me with each step. Once inside my truck, I slammed the doors shut and started the engine with trembling hands. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the silhouettes still advancing towards me, moving erratically but determinedly. I floored the accelerator, determined to get away from there as fast as possible. I drove down the dirt road at top speed, feeling the truck shake with every bump and turn. The shadows seemed to be getting closer, and the fear that something might go wrong, like a tire blowout or mechanical failure, terrified me. The radio started to emit static, and through the noise, I heard a deep, distorted voice that seemed to be mocking me. Finally, I saw the lights of the main highway in the distance. With a mix of relief and desperation, I steered the truck towards them, feeling the distance between the silhouettes and me gradually increase. As I reached the highway, the presence of other vehicles and lights made me feel a bit safer, but I couldn't stop driving until I was sure I was completely out of danger. After reaching the main highway, I continued driving without stopping, still fearful of what I had left behind. My mind was in a whirlwind of thoughts, trying to understand what had really happened. I decided to call Emily again to make sure Todd was okay and to tell her about my experience. While I was talking to Emily, suddenly, the truck's CB radio burst into intense static. The distorted, deep voice I had heard before returned, this time saying, "Cole, you are not safe. We're still coming for you." Terror took over me again, and Emily, hearing my reaction, asked worriedly what was happening. I told her I would keep in touch and quickly hung up. I drove to the nearest truck stop with my heart pounding. I stopped to catch my breath and think about what to do next. I knew I needed to stay alert and not let my guard down. Even though I was far from where it all started, the threat was still chasing me. The next day, I met with Todd and Emily at their home. I explained everything in detail, from the initial call to the silhouettes, the radio voice, and the final threat. Todd remained silent for a moment, then looked at me seriously and said, "Cole, I don't know what to say. This is stranger than I can imagine, but I believe you. Someone wanted you to go to that place and is still following you." As we shared more stories and experiences, we began to consider the possibility that there was something supernatural on the highways we knew so well. It wasn't the first time any of us had heard about strange phenomena, but this experience was undoubtedly the most terrifying and confusing I had ever lived through. The uncertainty and fear remained, especially when I thought about the voice on the radio. Since then, I've continued to live and work as a trucker, but every time the truck's CB radio sounds, a chill runs down my spine. The fear that the voice might appear again, reminding me that I'm not safe, never completely disappears. Todd and I keep in constant communication, always supporting each other and staying alert. Although I never discovered who or what led me to that place, the experience left an indelible mark and a lesson. On the vast and dark highways of America, there is more than the eyes can see and the mind can comprehend. I really hope you like this tale. I am thrilled to share these stories with you. Share this video with others so that we can keep growing and more stories can reach more people. Kindly provide your thoughts and experiences in the comments section. It will aid in my further development. If you like the video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Many thanks, and I hope to see you again soon.